I'm making a video for my son for his birthday, and I hit the fucking camera like an idiot. So, the original one I made was supposed to come out on your birthday. Um, it didn't work out, and then me and your mom started fighting, and I forgot what day it was for 2 weeks. So, that's an accident, my bad. However, to make it up to you, I'm not gonna give you that first video because it's really depressing and it's meant for you when you're way older. Instead, I'll tell you a story, which apparently is one of my only good features, that I'm a good storyteller. And we'll find out. So, when I first made an email address, there was security proof for my Gmail that asked me, who my favorite hero was. And I would have to come up with my own answer. And I was like, man, who do I look up to? And I had to really think hard. But then not hard at all once I finally landed on the guy. This guy named Lubu from the Han Dynasty in China, from a story in a book. It's not just a book, though, it's history. It's the Chinese history of the collapse of the Han Empire. He was not technically a hero. People really hated him, and they also wanted him on their side no matter what. Really good fighter. He was the best. He was known as a demon on the battlefield, but other people knew him as the god of war in China. He's like the Chinese equivalent to Achilles of Troy, and just pretty much mastered everything. Was taught how to fight, ride, shoot bow and arrow, even on the back of the horse, strategize, use the elements, use the earth, everything on the battlefield. It, no one really asked him what he ever wanted to do when he was young. He was just taught. Noble families. So, came time his noble family was going to join the wrong side, and him being a very strong son in this time period, very, very talented killer. He was ordered to go and do the dirty work, basically, and go fight. Instead, from a very early age, he decided that's morally wrong. He didn't want to go and fight in an army, at the head of an army, against certain people, like innocents. Instead, he did the most logical thing I've ever heard of a human doing, and he killed his dad instead. And it seems really cruel and messed up right now to think about. But because he killed his dad and walked away from war that first time, people regarded him as a monster. But he actually spared villages and towns corrupt rule for years off of one decision. Instead of fighting hundreds of people on the battlefield, he killed it in its crib. And not only did he do that, but he did it to his own family. I thought to myself, there's no way you could be so rational after you were taught to be cold and unfeeling, and the first thing you do is go against everything you've ever been taught. What kind of strength can a man have? How strong can a man be to rebel against your own nature and hurt yourself? And he did. Killed his dad. And he was a vagrant after that. He was wandering the lands, but people knew his story. People knew how impossibly good at everything he was. They wanted him on their side. So, as a foster child in vagrancy, he was adopted by warlords again and again, sent in, and this time he had no reason to spare the person sending him the pain of what they were really doing. He actually went out and fought this time and gained a reputation for being unstoppable. The man swung a giant poleaxe, which, if you know anything about weapons, it crushes armor, horses, and he could use it with one hand. He was so tall, and he was the basically the biggest Chinese man in in regards to the story. He was the biggest. So he crushed everyone, and he was really trying. In retrospect, when the story said and done, he was just punishing himself for what he had done. His guilt was so bad, he thought the battlefield would elate some of those feelings, and he went out and fought. He thought at some point, like all the other warriors that he ever came across, all the soldiers that he served, all the people he defended, he believed that there was a point. But he had no dreams of his own anymore. He didn't believe he was worth having a dream after what he had done, even if it spared people. So he chased other people's dreams. He decided to be loyal to the next lord or lady he served. All of them betrayed him. All of them betrayed his beliefs, his values and goals to do the right thing didn't matter to them. They sent him in wherever he was needed to crush rebellion without argument. If he showed up, people just knew to either stop fighting or die. It's a terrible reputation to have. Sometimes that might spare another battle, but he ended up killing the next lord because they were going to order him to do something worse. He was desperate. There's two foster fathers later, I believe, he landed with a truly corrupt person, but talked to him like a son. He promised Lubu everything. He said, "Together, with your skill, in my dream, we'll rule the land." And you know what? They did. Dong Zhuo, his newest foster father, overthrew and deposed the current emperor. He held the capital city and led the country from the seat of power, unquestioned, with Lubu at his side. Who was going to fight him? That who was going to be the entire country, it turned out. Had to form a coalition to even try to stop him. And oddly enough, it didn't work. Why? Because in Lubu's eyes, Dong Zhuo's dream came true. For at least a little while, he believed he had done something truly worth protecting. So he went out and he literally repelled the entire country at a gate by himself. Belief, inner strength. He was, of course, doubtful. He was taught nothing else. He was doubtful about what fighting meant. He knew what it was, but he didn't know how to use it for himself. So he used it for others. And in this case, he wowed the country when he did this. The coalition was forced to back off for a little while before they sent their best warriors ever to get around him. And they sacked the city. He did not go down in the fight As a matter of fact, he ended up when he found out that they had basically already lost, he killed Dong Zhuo, his third foster father, I believe, and spared him the pain of losing it all and running for his life. After he was the strongest dad that he had run across so far, the man was about to run off and prove that he was just like all the others. Lubu didn't want him to live with the guilt, killed him. Didn't want him to live with the cowardice, because Lubu didn't run off. In the middle of the battle, he was so surrounded that he had no choice but to let other people go by him. The city was gone, on fire. They'd rather burn the capital than see it under corrupt rule. And the country was behind that effort. It was more like a symbol than it was a tragedy. In that fire, a woman named Diao Chan lost her father, I believe. And her father was working with the coalition and others to depose Dong Zhuo in secret. And she pledged to her father in that fire, I believe, that he that she would restore the Han Empire, the empire that had peace before Dong Zhuo. And she was not strong, she was not fast, she was beautiful, the most beautiful woman in the country. And she was taught by basically a sleeper agent to depose government. She knew how to use her feminine wiles. She knew how to use the fact that she was so charming and beautiful to get into anywhere, unquestioned. She was schooled in most arts, dance. At the time, these were very important for women. Music was one of the most encapsulating things about her. She sang, she danced, she played the instruments, and obviously got close to warlords in a celebratory fashion. They welcomed her very easily. She got in with Dong Zhuo before any of that stuff ever happened and was trying to have him killed. Lubu was under a lot of pressure to defend the dream, but then he was also watching this woman the whole time. She was getting closer to Dong Zhuo on the throne, and Lubu, being the dutiful son, was always watching for her intent. And she thought nothing of him besides him being a dumb brute. But he was looking right through her the whole time. She, eventually, when Dong Zhuo was doing something less than polite to a woman, groping and all that, looked to see Lubu's reaction. Lubu is, of course, disgusted, but how's he going to say anything against his dad? Especially the Emperor. So he said nothing, but he looked, and he did feel sorry, but not because she was, um, you know, doing something embarrassing, but because she wanted to be there, and he could tell that she was trying hard to be in the company of this man. And Lubu was not stupid, it turns out. Not at all. He was a kind soul. He did want to defend her honor, just like he would anyone. However, her dedication proved to him that he should do nothing but wait to make her intent known. So he did nothing. Until the day finally came that she decided she wanted to use the strongest warrior in all the land against the current emperor, depose him and restore the Han Empire in one single stroke, she believed. In the beginning, he simply said no. He entertained her ideas and her ideology about restoring what was before. He had no delusions about it. The country was split before then, and he knew it would do very little to change the outcome. But he listened to her talk about how things were. And besides the fact that it was better in trade and prosperity, it did little to help him, and he knew it. He knew that the society that was created what he was now, and he didn't really want to see it restored. But the way this woman talked about her childhood made him realize why she was doing what she was doing very early. But he loved to hear her talk. She got lost in her attempt to woo him to do what he wanted, that she started to even try. She even courted Lubu, and Lubu, being way more gentlemanly than Dong Zhuo, never made a move. In fact, rejected it when she came on to him. Good man, loyal man. But eventually, when in the sight of his father doing these things to this woman who he had learned is a genuine person and was reduced to yes, my lords, he couldn't stand it for much longer. So he asked if there was a thing he could do to get her out of the under the foot of a man so vile and corrupt, and what she really wanted, what she wanted, not for the country, but what she wanted. And she said peace. And from that day on, starting with killing Dong Zhuo, he wandered the land with her, liberating strongholds, forts from military captors, and literally dominated the countryside wherever she went, wherever she led. Her dream became more important because peace actually led to something, and he thought he might actually get something out of it, something happy, maybe, or maybe make her happy. Despite him hating fighting, fort by country, he was taking over by himself, leading. And when people fought in front of him that could have ruined the entire thing, what did he do? He used diplomacy. And no one ever expected the fact that he might use peace instead of force. One of the most popular stories is when he settled an argument between a few officers when they were boasting about their strategies and which could be better, and disregarding the fact that both plans risked soldiers' lives. So instead of entertaining the argument, he stood between them, grabbed a bow, and he made a bet with both of them. He said, I can hit that lamp over there with this arrow. And it was far out of range for any archer has ever tried at the time. Neither of them could believe it. And he said if he could do it, they would stop arguing and they would agree to come up with a plan together. They would support the troop. So they took the bet, and he hit the mark. Stopped the fighting without fighting. From that moment, that strategist who saw that, I believe his name was Chen Gong, saw that the leader that everyone was following and thinking was a dumb brute had heart. He won real people eventually and turned them from their corrupt and manipulative ways even on his travels. All while making the biggest enemies the country has ever known. Everyone wanted him dead. Who wanted the risk of their home being torn asunder and allegiances changed at a moment's notice? If this woman said he should be there, he would have done it. After a amount of time, she declared her love for him and tried to, have him legitimately unify the country, moving from one lord to another, and he eventually became as known as a traitor as well as a murderer, a father killer, because of how many lords he ended up betraying that was on her hit list from the previous war. He did these things, and she would feign the happiness. It wasn't real. She was honoring her father, not doing what she really wanted, and he could tell it wasn't enough. And he wondered when it would be enough. How long did he have to suffer before she was really happy? Before she noticed that he wasn't? He never wore a smile, not even for her. Eventually, the time came that he was hunted singularly. They went after him. He betrayed the wrong warlord, the peace-loving warlord. He was too weak to get peace on his own. That's what made him worthy of her list. Little did she know, he had stronger followers. Liu Bei was his name. Liu Bei had stronger followers and more faithful, loyal people, poor workers under him than any other warlord. He was beloved. Lu Bu had betrayed the last warlord he would ever betray because of that. And he did it for her. Liu Bei took Lu Bu in as a brother. Liu Bei did that often. He made friends with the people. He was a shoemaker when he started. He earned his lordship through deeds, not family. His family was noble, but he wasn't. Liu Bei got help from a man named Cao Cao, or they like to say Cao Cao now. Back then in the game, they had it wrong, I guess. But for my purposes, Cao Cao led a giant force at the time. He was the biggest and most successful army after the gate went down in the capital. So they went after him at the request of Liu Bei to try to win the people. Cao Cao wasn't as good with the people, but he believed helping Liu Bei would help him. And killing Lu Bu was a benefit if he couldn't have Lu Bu on his side, which he did try later. So, Lu Bu went to the defense of the castle he had just taken from Liu Bei. And unfortunately, despite having loyal soldiers himself who would follow him to hell, they weren't enough. They weren't smart enough to be creative to defend themselves. They thought simply being with him made them immortal. Cao Cao and Liu Bei's combined power and their loyal family and followers among them overwhelmed the castle, but never once stepped foot in. Lu Bu was manning the ramparts, and he destroyed every single horseman, rider, and catapult. With him at the helm, they were not going to win. However, I guess you could say God was on their side. There was huge, a huge rainstorm, I believe, and there was a floodgate that was closed. They destroyed the dam, I believe, and flooded the castle, and all the heavy infantrymen, I believe, drowned, except for Lu Bu, who's too tall and too strong to go down even in that terrain in a flooded castle. He was the only man left standing, and he escaped. For this story's purposes, anyway, he escaped. Diao Chen escaped before the castle flooded with his daughter. In this story, he met her on a field after getting off of his legendary horse that took him all the way to his technical wife. Arrows all over his back and smiling. And she was just thrown in tears. She was so sorry to have put him through so much pain and anguish, and she really thought that together they could do anything. Of course, he was still human, but he waited too long to find out if she was ever going to notice. So, in the end, she started to apologize and try to tell him everything. Before she could even get the first word of an apology out, he said, "I know." And dumbfounded, she told him, "No, you don't." And he said, "I know." He knew. He knew he was getting used. He knew that her dream wasn't going to come true. But he thought by trying, showing her that people cared, she might change. He died. And she left with her daughter. He's my hero. And it was a great game. Stories like that don't belong in video games. I learned this in middle school. I knew what love was in the future. Way back then, what it really looked like. It's sad. When the war went on without them, and eventually peace did come, but it cost everything for the country to realize what they had done to themselves. I believe in the end, the two remaining warlords, after another couple decades of fighting, decided they had had enough of war, both of them, after losing all of their family to it. Liu Bei's son and Cao Cao's honored strategist's son, who betrayed the empire to get what they had. Even that sacrifice meant nothing to his newest son. He just wanted his dad, his love. Didn't care about the country. Never did. And he met Liu Bei's son, who didn't who cared maybe too much about his father, but also knew more than anyone that his father was wrong and should have stopped fighting decades before that. Had he done that, Lu Bu would have never betrayed him if he had no army. He didn't like fighting, didn't like armies. They could have had peace decades earlier. Man's my hero. And I hope you learned something from this too, Killian. And I want to do this again. This is fun. I love telling you stories. I wish I could be there. But I know by not being there, you're happy with her. And that sacrifice is worth it. Hopefully, she'll notice. You have a good night.